Russians have calculated that the Western countries will back off under nuclear blackmail.
How would you react to the recent developments in Ukraine and Russia's increased pressure and UK and USA's further backing?
That they're very worried, obviously, that Trump is going to pull the rug from under their feet.
So perhaps on the change that's going on right now in Europe, in the Middle East as well, but maybe firstly in Europe, how would you react to the recent developments in Ukraine and Russia's increased pressure and UK and USA's further backing?
Well, so if I can backtrack to the
Sure.
previous question, which I didn't fully answer. I mean, it isn't that we're living in a completely chaotic environment and people have got to suffer it. You can make employment more stable, which is, I think, what the government's trying to do. You can make tenancies more stable. There are ways in which people can be helped to live in a world of flux. So one shouldn't be despairing, but we're for technological reasons, we're in a much more fast-moving world that you can't just slow down because it's uncomfortable. But on your bigger question about the world, I took a personal interest in the Ukraine war. I went to Ukraine fairly early on. I got the bus from Warsaw Airport, and spent some time talking to decision makers and think tanks and universities in Ukraine, and developed a very strong feeling that we should be giving them maximum support. And I think Britain has a pretty commendable record certainly under the last government, under this one too. We should stick with them. They're very worried, obviously, that Trump is going to pull the rug from under their feet. But I think the British and the European countries have got to make it clear that Putin shouldn't just be allowed to walk over them. I mean, there is going to have to be a messy compromise, but we should give the Ukrainians the maximum support we can financially and militarily.
Is there a risk in doing that? Do you think?
Yeah, there is a risk, and certainly giving more advanced weapons is taking a risk. And but I think that the Russians have calculated that the Western countries will back off under nuclear blackmail and their general approach, and as a result, they've got a sort of tactical advantage. And I think that there are occasions when, although it's risky, when I think the Western countries have to stand firm, and this is one of them.
I mean, only a few days ago, Lieutenant General from the UK said that if Russia were to invade anywhere else in Eastern Europe, then they would go straight there and put UK and other forces on the ground. How likely do you see this being in the upcoming months, and how likely do you think that is to turn into something much more significant?
Well, not very likely. I mean, after all, the Russians have struggled to make any headway against Ukraine. I mean, the idea that their tanks can then roll over the rest of Europe is beyond fantasy. But there are bits on the periphery of Europe which are vulnerable. I mean, Moldova is an obvious one, possibly the Baltic states. And we are part of an alliance which includes certainly the latter three. And we should honour that. The fact is, Britain's defence capability has run down, and that's partly because we haven't had a particularly successful economy. We've more or less done our 2% of GDP, but I think Britain has got to put more resources into defence, along with other bits of the public realm, which goes back to your very first question, and why I think we are going to have to accept higher levels of basic taxation.
Israeli airstrikes have struck Gaza's biggest hospital.
There's a clear indication that there's looser standards being applied to arms being supplied there.
Had I been in the government, I would probably have sought restrictions sooner. If we're going to restore public services, which are terribly battered in many areas, people are going to have to pay. Stop worrying about tuition fees. It's a form of graduate income tax. One shouldn't scaremongering about that.
Why do you think the West feel threatened by China?
The ability of the United States to run the world has been undermined by China's growth. China now has a bigger economy than the United States.